In the year 1539, a Bible was chained to a reading desk in an English parish church. Chained, not to keep it safe from thieves, but to keep it in place so that any farmer, any blacksmith, any woman who could read a little could walk in off the road and put her finger on the page. That Bible was called the Great Bible. And if that woman turned to the first book of Samuel, chapter 16, verse 12, the moment the prophet Samuel lays eyes on the shepherd boy who will become the greatest king in Hebrew history, she would have read four words that almost no American Christian has ever seen. And he was brown. Brown, not fair, not fair-haired, not the golden boy of the stained glass windows. Brown. Now hold that word in your mind and walk with me about 70 years forward to 1611, to the printing house of Robert Barker in London, where the King James Bible is coming off the press under the authority of the English crown. Same book, same chapter, same verse, same boy standing in front of the same prophet, and the word is gone. In its place, ruddy. One word swapped for another, four letters traded for five, and within a few generations the shepherd from Bethlehem, a Hebrew, from a Semitic people living on the edge of Africa, in a land that had been walked by Egyptians and Cushites for 1,000 years before he was born, that boy would be carved in white Italian marble, painted with light brown curls and pale skin, and hung on the walls of cathedrals from Florence to London, and nobody would think it strange. Here's what I want you to understand before we go one step further, because this is where most people get this story wrong, and I am not going to sell you a story I cannot back up. I am not going to tell you that the King James translators sat in a locked room and crossed out a verse that said David was a black man. That is not what the record shows, and I will show you exactly what the record does show, including the parts that complicate it, because you deserve the whole page, not the corner of it. What I am going to show you is stranger, better documented, and honestly harder to explain away. I am going to show you that for roughly 70 years, printed English Bibles could not agree on what the Hebrew text was even saying about this man's appearance, that the word they landed on in 1539 was brown, that the Hebrew word underneath it is still argued over by serious scholars today, and that while the translators were fighting over one adjective, something far more powerful was happening a few hundred miles away in Italy, where artists were building the face that would replace the text entirely. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about how history gets rewritten. It doesn't usually happen with a knife. It happens with a paintbrush. Stay with me. By the end of this, you'll be able to open any Bible in your house, turn to the page yourself, and see the seam where the story was stitched. Let's go. First, I need you to understand why printed pages are different from everything else in this argument. For most of human history, when a people's identity got altered, it happened in the air. Somebody told a story differently. A preacher emphasized one thing and skipped another. A grandmother's version and a governor's version drifted apart over 3 generations, and there was no way to prove which one had moved. Print changed that. When Johannes Gutenberg's technology reached England in the late 15th century, something happened that had never happened before. A sentence could be frozen. 10,000 identical copies of the same claim with a date on the title page sitting in 10,000 different rooms. That means a printed Bible is not an opinion, it's a receipt. And it means that when the wording changes between one printing and the next, you can actually see it happen. You can put 1535 next to 1539, and 1539 next to 1560, and 1560 next to 1611, and watch a description move, the way a doctor watches a shadow move on an X-ray. So let me set the table properly, because the dates matter here. In 1535, Miles Coverdale published the first complete Bible printed in the English language. It was printed on the continent, most likely in Antwerp by a printer named Merton de Keyser, and dedicated to King Henry VIII. Coverdale was not a Hebrew scholar. He said so himself. He worked from William Tyndale's earlier English work, from the Latin Vulgate, and, this part is critical, remember it, from Martin Luther's German Bible and the Swiss-German Zurich Bible. Then, in 1537, came the Matthew's Bible, and in 1539, the Great Bible, the first English Bible officially authorized to be read aloud in the churches of England, prepared by Coverdale himself under the patronage of Thomas Cromwell. That's the chained Bible. That's the one in the parish. Then, in 1560, the Geneva Bible, produced by English Protestants who had fled to Switzerland. In 1568, the Bishop's Bible, and in 1611, the King James. 6 major English Bibles in 76 years. 6 chances for a description to shift, and it shifted. Now let's read them, slowly, in the actual spelling of the actual printings. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12, the moment of the anointing. Coverdale, 1535. Then sent he and caused him be brought, and he was well colored with fair eyes and of a beautiful countenance. Well colored. Matthew's Bible, 1537. And he sent and brought him in, and he was brown with goodly eyes and well favored in sight. Brown. The Great Bible, 1539, the authorized one, the chained one, the one in the parish church. And he sent and brought him in, and he was brown and of an excellent beauty and well favored in sight. Brown again. Now the Geneva Bible, 1560, and he was ruddy and of a good countenance and comely visage. The Bishop's Bible, 1568, and he was ruddy and of an excellent beauty and well favored in sight. And the King James Bible, 1611, now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. There it is, on the page, with dates on it. 2 English Bibles printed under Tudor authority said brown. Every English Bible after 1560 says ruddy. And the version that conquered the English-speaking world, the one that got carried on ships, planted in colonies, read on plantations, quoted by presidents, and printed more times than any book in the history of the language, is the one that says ruddy. Let me ask you something right now, because I want to hear your answer in the comments before you hear my analysis. If you had grown up reading brown instead of ruddy, every Sunday, your whole life, do you think the pictures in your children's Bible would look the same? Be honest. Tell me below, because I don't think they would. And that's the whole video, right there. Now, let's do the hard part, and let's do it properly, because I promised you the whole page. The Hebrew word sitting underneath all of this is admoni, spelled Aleph, Daled, Mim, Waw, Nun, Yod. It appears in the description of David in 1 Samuel 16, and again in 1 Samuel 17, when Goliath looks him up and down. Admoni comes from the root Adom, meaning red, and Adom is related to Adamah, the earth, the ground, the soil. It is the same root family that gives us the name Adam. Sit with that for a second. The word used to describe the appearance of the shepherd king is built from the word for earth. Now here's the complication, and I'm giving it to you straight because you're going to hear it from somebody eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me. That same word, admoni, is used one other significant time in the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis chapter 25, verse 25, describing Esau at birth. And in Genesis, almost every English Bible, including Coverdale's own 1535 printing, renders it red. So Coverdale used red for Esau and well-colored for David. Same word, 2 renderings, in the same book, printed on the same press, in the same year. And there's more. The Greek Septuagint translated by Hebrew scholars in Alexandria in Egypt more than 2 centuries before the Common Era, rendered it pyrrhikes, a word in the red family. The Latin Vulgate from the 4th century has rufus, red. So the red reading is old, much older than England, much older than King James, much older than the Atlantic. Which raises the obvious question, then where on earth did brown come from? And the answer is genuinely fascinating. It came from Germany. Martin Luther, translating into German, did something unusual with this verse. Where the Greek and the Latin said red, Luther wrote brownlift, brownish, and he did it specifically for David in 1 Samuel 16 and 17, while keeping reddish for Esau in Genesis. Scholars have argued for a long time about why. One well-known suggestion is that in late medieval European art, red hair was the visual marker of Judas the betrayer, so red carried a stain that Luther may have wanted to keep off the ancestor of the Messiah. Whatever the reason, that choice is right there in the German text of 1545, and it stayed in German Bibles for centuries. It is still there in the Luther Bible revision of 2017. And Coverdale, who worked from Luther and the Zurich Bible rather than from Hebrew, carried it into England. Matthew's Bible carried it. The Great Bible carried it into every parish in England. So the brown on that chained page in 1539 is real ink. It is on the page. It was read aloud in English churches by royal authority. But it did not come from a suppressed Hebrew manuscript. It came through a German window. Now, some of you are typing right now, and I want you to finish the thought before you hit send, because it's a good one. Because the honest question isn't who deleted the truth. The honest question is why does a word describing an earth-colored, sun-lived Middle Eastern shepherd get translated so nervously in so many languages for so many centuries? Nobody argues this hard about the color of Goliath. Hold that. We're coming back to it.
Here's what I find genuinely strange about this whole debate. Everybody argues about one adjective in one verse, and almost nobody talks about the map, because the map is not disputed by anyone, not by archaeologists, not by historians, not by theologians. This is the part where there is no controversy at all, which is exactly why it should be the loudest part of the video. Ancient Israel sat on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, in the southern Levant. To the south and west, Egypt. To the south of Egypt, Nubia and the kingdom of Cush. To the east, Mesopotamia. To the north, Syria and Anatolia. This is the land bridge. This is the corridor where Africa and Asia physically meet. There is no ocean between ancient Israel and Africa. There is a walk. The Hebrew Bible knows this intimately. It is not a European book that happens to mention Africa. It is a book soaked in Africa. Abraham goes down to Egypt. Joseph rules in Egypt. Jacob's entire family relocates to Egypt and stays for generations. Moses is raised in an Egyptian household and is mistaken for an Egyptian by the daughters of Midian in Exodus chapter 2. Mistaken, meaning he did not look out of place there. The Exodus itself is a story about leaving Africa. And this is a people whose scriptures describe a world in which Cush, the Nile Valley kingdom south of Egypt, is not a foreign curiosity, but a constant presence. Now let me name the passages because your Bible has them and your Sunday school didn't cover them. Numbers chapter 12. Moses marries a Cushite woman. Miriam and Aaron speak against him for it, and it is Miriam who is struck for the offense. 2 Chronicles chapter 14. Zerah the Cushite marches against Judah with an enormous army. Jeremiah chapter 38. When the prophet Jeremiah is thrown into a cistern to die, the man who goes to the king argues for his life and personally organizes the rescue with ropes and rags is Ebed-Melech the Cushite. A Cushite is the moral hero of that chapter. Isaiah, Zephaniah, the Psalms, Cush appears again and again. The Book of Acts, chapter 8, an Ethiopian official, treasurer to the Kandake, is reading the scroll of Isaiah in his chariot on the road to Gaza. He is reading Hebrew scripture because it is his. And in Acts chapter 13, in the leadership of the church at Antioch, we are given a list of names that includes Simeon, who was called Niger. None of this is hidden. None of this is disputed. It's printed in every Bible in America, including the King James. So here's my question for the comments, and I want you to think about it seriously. If all of that is right there in the text, the Cushite wife, the Cushite general, the Cushite rescuer, the Ethiopian reading Isaiah, how did an entire continent get taught that this was a European story? Because that didn't happen in the translation. That happened somewhere else. Before we get to where it happened, I want to give you one more example of how translation shapes perception. And this one is not speculation. This is a live, documented, ongoing scholarly argument, and it happens to involve David's own son. Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 5. The voice in the poem says in Hebrew, Shechorah ani v'nava, black am I and lovely. That little word in the middle, the Hebrew letter vav, is the ordinary Hebrew conjunction. Its default meaning is and. The King James Bible of 1611 renders the verse, I am black but comely. But. And once you have but, you have created something the Hebrew did not necessarily contain, a contrast, a concession. Black, however, still beautiful. The word but quietly installs an assumption that blackness and beauty are in tension and need reconciling. Modern translations have gone back and forth on this for decades. Many now render it black and beautiful, or dark and lovely. Others keep but. Scholars have written entire papers on this single conjunction, and reasonable people still disagree about the poem's intent. But notice what this shows you. Not a deleted verse, not a burned page, not a conspiracy in a locked room. A three-letter English word. That's how it works. That's how it has always worked. Nobody has to destroy a text to change what a text does to a reader. You just have to choose over and over in 1,000 small places which of two possible words to set in the tray. And who gets to choose is a question about power. Which brings us to 1611. Let me be precise here, because precision is what makes this stick. The King James Bible was not a neutral academic exercise. It was a state project, and the record on this is public and clear. King James I convened it after the Hampton Court Conference of 1904. Roughly 47 scholars were organized into 6 companies working at Westminster, Oxford, and Cambridge. They worked under a written set of instructions, commonly counted as 15 rules, laid down under the oversight of Richard Bancroft, who would become Archbishop of Canterbury. And those rules were not shy about their purpose. The first rule stated that the bishop's Bible was to be followed and altered as little as the original would permit. Another rule preserved the old ecclesiastical words, and it named one specifically. The word church was to be kept, rather than translated as congregation, which is what Tyndale had used, and which carried very different implications about who holds religious authority. Read that again, a translation rule about a single English word issued to protect an institution. And then there was distribution. The printing of the Bible in England was a crown monopoly held by the king's printer. Robert Barker paid for that privilege, and his house produced the 1611 edition. So you have committees appointed under royal authority, written instructions preserving institutional language, and a monopoly controlling who is legally allowed to print it. Now, that combination did not, on the evidence, delete a description of David's skin. I've shown you the receipts on that. The word ruddy was already in the Geneva Bible of 1560 and the Bishop's Bible of 1668, and its ancestry runs back through Latin to Greek to the Hebrew root.
But that same combination absolutely did something else, and it did it at the scale nothing in history had matched. It made one English Bible the English Bible, and it did it in the exact decades when English ships were beginning to move across the Atlantic in earnest. That's the part that matters, not a stolen verse, a standardized voice, carried by an expanding empire into colonies, into missions, into schoolrooms for 400 years. One vocabulary, one set of word choices, one image of the sacred exported everywhere. And this channel has been here before, hasn't it? We've walked through what happened to the Hebrew names in that same 1611 printing, how the sound of a people's own language got smoothed out into something an English mouth found comfortable. Same press, same era, same instinct to make the foreign familiar. But today, we're talking about faces.
Because here is the thing I really want you to take away from this video. While English translators were arguing over brown and ruddy, the war for David's face had already been lost. And it wasn't lost in a Bible, it was lost in a studio. In 1504, in Florence, Michelangelo finished a 17-foot statue of David, carved from a single block of Carrara marble. White marble, a young European athlete's body. It became and remains one of the most reproduced images of a human being ever made. Before that, Donatello had cast his bronze David. Verrocchio made another. Caravaggio painted the scene with Goliath's head. Rembrandt painted David and Saul. Century after century, in workshop after workshop, European artists painted the Hebrew Bible using the only models they had in the room: themselves, their apprentices, their neighbors, the merchant's son down the street. And I want to be fair about this. For most of those artists, this was not a plot, it was habit. It's what artists have always done. Ethiopian iconography painted Hebrew figures as Ethiopian. Byzantine icons painted them Byzantine. Persian manuscripts painted them Persian. That is normal. What was not normal was what came next, because European art didn't stay in Europe. It got attached to European ships, European empires, European printing presses, European missions, European school books, and then in the 20th century to European and American film. Think about the cascade for a second. Renaissance paintings become engravings. Engravings become the illustrations in family Bibles. Family Bible illustrations become the pictures in Hollywood biblical epics. Hollywood casting becomes what 4 generations of children on multiple continents unconsciously believe the Bible looks like. Nobody had to change a verse, they just had to change the picture that appears in your mind when you read the verse. And that is a far more total kind of rewriting than editing text, because you can't fact-check an assumption you don't know you're making. You can look up a word, you cannot look up the automatic image your brain produces when you hear the word David. Now, let me put the honest question to you, and I genuinely want the comment section on this one. Which do you think shaped more minds over the last 500 years, the wording in 1 Samuel 16 or Michelangelo? I have my answer. I want yours. So let's land this plane, and let's land it on solid ground, because I want you to be the person in the room who can't be embarrassed. Here is what the evidence supports, all of it, verifiable, citable, and printed. 1. The ancient Israelites were a Semitic people of the southern Levant, living at the junction of Africa and Asia. That is not a theory. That is geography and archaeology. Their material culture, their language family, their trade, their politics, and their scriptures are continuous with the ancient Near East and the Nile Valley, not with Northern Europe. Whatever David looked like, he looked like a man from that world, brown-skinned, sun-lived, at home in a landscape a few days' walk from Egypt. 2.
The white European David of the paintings and the marble is a documented invention with a date, a place, and an artist's name attached. It is not a description from any manuscript in any language. It came from Italy and then from everywhere Italy's art traveled. 3. English Bibles genuinely disagreed about the wording of his appearance for roughly 70 years, and the officially authorized Bible chained in English parish churches in 1539 said brown. That is real ink. Go look at it. 4. The Hebrew word admoni is genuinely contested. Scholars still debate whether it describes hair, complexion, general vigor, or something else entirely, and translators in multiple languages have made visibly nervous choices with it for 500 years, including Luther, who reached for brownish and then kept reddish for Esau. 5. Small translation choices carry enormous weight, and Song of Songs 1:5 is the cleanest proof. One three-letter conjunction, but instead of and, reshaping how millions of readers hear a line about blackness and beauty. 6. The King James Bible was a state-supervised project working under written rules that explicitly protected institutional vocabulary, printed on the back of an expanding empire. That is not a slur against it. That is its own documented history. Now, here is what the evidence does not support, and I'm telling you plainly because a case that can be broken is not worth carrying. It does not support the claim that the King James translators found a verse saying David was a black man and struck it out. The red reading is older than England. It's in the Greek Septuagint from Alexandria, centuries before Christ. The word ruddy was already sitting in the Geneva Bible of 1560, half a century before King James convened anyone. And I'd argue you don't need that claim. You never did. Because the real story is bigger, and it's harder to deny. The real story is that nobody had to hide a Hebrew king. They just had to keep painting him until you forgot what the map looked like.
So the next time you see him, in a stained glass window, in a movie, in a children's illustrated Bible, in a museum in Florence with a line around the block, I want you to do one thing. Ask where that face came from. Not whether it's flattering, not whether it's beautiful. Michelangelo's David is one of the most beautiful objects human hands have ever made, and I'm not asking anyone to be angry at a sculpture. I'm asking you to notice that it is a portrait of nobody. It is a Florentine model in Italian marble, wearing the name of a Hebrew shepherd from the hills outside Bethlehem, in a country that touches Africa. And then I want you to open the book, the actual book. Turn to Numbers 12 and read who Moses married. Turn to Jeremiah 38 and read who saved the prophet's life. Turn to 2 Chronicles 14 and read who Zerah was. Turn to Acts 8 and read who was sitting in that chariot with the scroll of Isaiah open on his lap. It's all in there. It was always in there. In your Bible. In the King James, too. Nobody hid it. They just stopped drawing it. So here's what I want from you. If you were never taught that the authorized English Bible of 1539 printed the word brown in 1 Samuel 16, comment 1535 below. I want to see how many of us grew up with that page and never knew it existed. And if this is the first time you've ever heard any of this, the Cushite thread, the Admony argument, the Luther connection, the conjunction and Song of Songs, then comment never. Just that word. I want to know how deep this goes. But do me one favor. Don't take my word for it, and don't argue with people in the comments about who feels what. Go pull the pages. Coverdale, 1535, the Great Bible, 1539, Geneva, 1560, Bishops, 1568, King James, 1611,
1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12. They're all online, all free, all photographed, all searchable. Set them side by side and read them yourself. Because that's the only argument that's ever actually won anything. Not louder voices, older pages. And if you want the rest of this trail, because there are more seams than this one, and some of them run right through the middle of names we thought we knew, you know what to do. I'll see you on the next page.